Start your wellness journey at Whole Foods Market, where it's Jumpstart January through the 16th. Stock up on supplements with some of the year's biggest savings. Plus, save on air-chilled organic boneless skinless chicken breasts, organic Honeycrisp apples, organic large Hass avocados, and more. And since Whole Foods Market is the only certified organic national grocer, it's easy to make them your wellness destination. Jumpstart your January now at Whole Foods Market.
At Consumer Cellular, you get the same exact coverage as the largest carriers, but for up to half the cost. Same thing, up to half the cost. Up to half the cost for the same thing. 50% the money for 100% the same thing. I hope I'm making myself clear. Consumer Cellular. When freedom calls, we're here to answer. Call us at 1-888-FREEDOM.
Half the cost savings based on cost of Consumer Cellular single-line 5GB data plan with unlimited talk and text compared to lowest cost single-line postpaid unlimited talk, text, and data plan offered by T-Mobile and Verizon May 2023.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. This is one of our irregular interview pods with a chat with somebody that we thought would be wasted if we just added it onto our usual pod yesterday. It's a really interesting interview, Kieran. Unfortunately, you weren't available to join me to do it. I've told you all about it. We spoke to Tony Taylor from Level Playing Field, which is a charity that advocates on behalf of disabled football and sports fans. And it was a fascinating chat, and I learned an awful lot. Tony, thank you so much for joining us. Before we start, as usual, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself, your background, and then about Level Playing Field and your role in it? So just the essay question to start.
Okay, well, the essay answer, I've been a football fan for far too many years than I care to remember. So I went to my first football match in the, I think in the 1960s, and an good old-fashioned Division 3 game. And as an individual, I've worked in the recruitment industry. I've been in the army, and at one point I was vice chair of Supporters Direct.
Okay.
And then I had a rather unpleasant car accident, which left me disabled, and all of a sudden I came across all of the barriers that we hear so much about in society that are put in the way of disabled people, and I got myself involved by default, I think, with Level Playing Field, and have been there for about 12, 13 years, something like that, all told. And as an organisation, we campaign for accessibility at sports stage. I think we're best known for football for obvious reasons. That's very much where our roots were lodged. But we're very much involved in other sports. So we engage with both codes of rugby. We're involved with horse racing and tennis and golf, all sorts of things. So it's interesting, but with the aim behind the organisation is to ensure that people with disabilities have the same right as everybody else to get in, to view the sport and follow the sport that they love. And the benefits to the individual with a disability from being able to do that are absolutely incredible.
Before we move on, Tony, I'm going to pretend that I'm asking you this question for a bit of context, but
yeah,
I'm only asking you just in case it turns out you're a Brighton fan. But who do you support?
Well, I don't support Brighton, and I don't. I'm not a Premier League fan, so I originally I was a Darlington fan for many years, which was a club that went through all sorts of issues with ownership, which was concurrent with my time as Supporters Direct, which was fascinating. So I was very active in the trust at Darlington Darlington at the time when George Reynolds was chairman, the infamous
I
George
remember.
Reynolds. So that was quite a time. More recently, I've become sort of apolitical, if that's the right word, in terms of football, and I enjoy watching football. Full stop. So I obviously I always keep an eye on what's happening with Darlington, and I also supported Middlesbrough when I was a youngster. So I'm a bit collaborative in my support. I've got to say.
Do you know what? I almost envy you. Imagine being able to enjoy watching football.
Imagine being a Darlington fan. That was at the time of George Reynolds. That was not an easy period of football support.
I asked this question with some sadness, Tony, but it's 2023. Some people listening to this may still be surprised that level playing field needs to exist. How much progress has been made in recent years since you've been part?
People often ask me that question, and like you, I always say, it's sad that there's a need for a level playing field. And we're in the 21st century; it shouldn't be needed. I suspect we'll probably still need it in the 22nd century.
Okay.
It's ever present, but there has been a huge amount of progress. When the Premier League announced its pledge, which came as a bit of a surprise to us. I think it was back in 2015. When that happened, it stimulated quite a lot of change and a lot of progress. And I think I mean, when I first started going to football matches, if you were disabled, you were lucky if you were able to push one of those blue smoke wagons into the corner of the pitch and watch from a three-wheeler. It really was pretty barbaric in those days. Now I think the facilities are much better. There's a lot more in the way of training of stewards at football clubs, which is something we're very much actively involved with at level playing field. And I think that sort of progress has been huge. And there's also been a recognition, I think, in the last few years that disability doesn't just mean wheelchair users. There's all sorts of issues that need to be considered. So I think we have made progress, but every time it's the one step forward, two steps back. I was feeling really good about the way things were going, and then all of a sudden we had the pandemic. There were great things done by clubs with disabled supporters during the pandemic, contacting them, keeping in regular touch with them, and then all of a sudden we had that debacle at Wembley that sets things back. We see events in Paris. It's it's frustrating. I've got to say that sometimes things seem to be good, and then all of a sudden we're in a real issue area.
I'm going to come on later, Tony, to the wheelchair debate, for want of a better word, and the more visible disabilities. Did you say they were called blue smoke wagons?
Well, that was my description for the old disability vehicles that used to be provided in the days before Motability. They're horrible. I think they were two-stroke vehicles with three wheels, and you could get one person in. They're absolutely ghastly things. I never actually went in one myself, but I always remember the smell that came out of the exhaust on the things.
Well, I think it's really important that younger listeners to this pod, Tony, we do have some, it turns out. Apparently one or two under the age of 30, we were surprised to hear, but we have many, many thousands of listeners. And I think a lot of them will be intrigued to hear that, because one of my earliest memories watching TV as a kid, watching football, was at Stamford Bridge, where you saw this, you can almost describe it as a kind of Del Boy type vehicle, which was parked almost behind the goal, very close to the goal, and it took a while. No one ever explained what it was. It's really interesting to hear your view on that. Where are we in comparison to other countries, Tony? And are you campaigning? Are you in touch with disability groups around Europe and around the world as well?
Absolutely, I mean, we're certainly. I think we're probably leading the way in England and Wales. I think we've made so much progress, and I think other countries do look to where we are. Personally, I keep in contact with clubs on outside of the level playing field patch, as I'm also on the board of the Centre for Access to Football in Europe, CAFE, which is our associate organisation that is now operating pretty much on a global basis. So yeah, we keep in touch, and it's disappointing sometimes to see progress again, very similar, replicating what's happening in the UK, that there is progress and then all of a sudden things start to go backwards. And the usual story, it's money is often a big motivator behind the issues.
I've been researching another football project, Tony, that's involved wading through, for want of a better word, the hundreds and hundreds of pages of FA and league ground regulations.
Yeah.
And until you get fairly high up the pyramid, whereas there are strict rules about toilet facilities for fans, match officials, and players, there are no specific rules for disabled fans. There's only a reminder of the club's obligations under the 1995 Disabilities Act. I found that really quite distressing, especially when every single page is emblazoned with a logo that says, open to all, fair to all, and that quite clearly isn't, is it?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. And I think if you look at the Premier League rule book, there are, I think, sort of 11 cursory references to disability. So that is an issue. And one of the things we're working on as an organisation is a rewrite of the Accessible Stadia Guide, which basically sets the standards for accessibility for sports stadia, and it won't just be for football. And one of the things I'd certainly like to see would be for this to be ingrained in the rule book, particularly in I think the Premier League. Everybody looks to the Premier League for obvious reasons, and I think they are a bit of a trailblazer on that. But certainly, if they were to access and ensure that there was compliance with Accessible Stadia Guide in their rules, then I think the chairman of the Premier League clubs who are perhaps not so active in terms of ensuring accessibility, I think there'd be a change of heart. Now, I've certainly heard it from one chairman who said, if it's in the rule book, we'll do it. But until it's in the rule book, we're just going to, just plod on as we are at the moment, which is kind of disappointing. But I can understand in some ways. Compliance is essential. And this, I've got to say, this is the point we made when I spoke with Tracy Crouch when she was carrying out her review. That one of the ways that we'll see real change in football. Now, let's just put this in context. 1 in 4 people in our society are in contact with somebody with a disability, one way or another. One in 4. That is a huge, huge minority. You look at the boardrooms of football clubs, governing bodies. You look at companies, they don't have anything like that sort of representation. So it can start right at the top with changes on that. And we argued for a bit like the financial services of financial requirements, that there should be a comply and explain regulation if they don't have more disabled people in senior leadership positions or indeed in management positions within organisations.
I'm amazed you managed to have a serious conversation with Tracy Crouch without her telling you how much she likes Kieran. Because most of my conversations with Kieran about how much he likes Tracy Crouch. You've actually preempted my next question there. It's interesting, is the Premier League regulations. Because I actually counted the paragraphs. There's just about as much in the Premier League regulations about space for the away team's data analysis crew as there is for disabled fans. But is it up to leagues to enforce rules on the disabled fans' experience, or is it up to clubs to go above and beyond the bare minimum requirements? Because it sounds to me what you were saying there about some Premier League clubs is that they're not exactly paying lip service, but they're doing the bare minimum that they need to do.
I think you only have to look at the figures. One of the problems I have, we often see the measurement of progress for particularly Premier League clubs is always down to the number of wheelchair spaces that are recommended and the actual. Now, I accept that there are real problems with that, and they probably do reflect in part the commitment of clubs to progress. But I'm a bit of a pragmatist by nature, and I understand that there is a cost involved. Disability is probably the one protected characteristic that involves capital outlay. If you want to deal with racism, you change hearts and minds. If you want to deal with homophobia, you change hearts and minds. If you want to deal with disability, you got to spend money one way or another. And that's where we come down to the problem. Plus, the usual excuse that I have presented to me is that we've got an old stadium. We can't do these changes. We can't possibly do that.
I'm going to come on to that as well, because unfortunately at my club that is an issue. But are there any clubs that are actually honest enough to say to you, look, Tony, one disabled bay, one wheelchair bay takes up the space of 12 to 14 seats that we could sell?
I've heard that time and time again, and I'm sorry, I don't buy it. I think there's a legal issue that clubs have got. I don't think football should not be exempt from legal scrutiny, and it's managed to evade it or avoid it so far by making changes. But at the end of the day, we do have an Equality Act, and clubs are required to make reasonable adjustments. And part of me hopes that we never get to the stage where that has to be tested in court. But the other part of me says that until we actually have that proper legal definition of what a reasonable adjustment is, we're never going to make a great deal of progress. So there are arguments on both sides there, I think.
I want to ask you about the other excuses that clubs might be giving, because I love horse racing. You mentioned I love horse racing.
Yeah,
and at a race course, you think to yourself, well, there's a lot of space there. Surely, once you're in the course, there's a lot of space. There's no excuse you can imagine for not making access more easy. Mm-hmm. But I also love theatre. That's my background, comedy and theatre, and many West End theatres are still saying, well, it's a Victorian building. What can we do? I was a very dear friend of mine, God rest her soul. I was her companion. She loved ballet. So I went to quite a few shows with her, and it became embarrassing sometimes. There was one theatre that I won't name where the disabled toilet was on the second floor, but there was no lift. And when I asked to speak to the manager of the theatre about it, he was lovely and apologetic, but he said, well, it was built in 1871. No one cared about those things. So what excuses are clubs do? And I know my club, Crystal Palace, the goodwill towards disabled fans is enormous, and they have made some brilliant changes. A quiet room for autistic fans, for example. They've done a lot of stuff, but Steve Parish. And he says quite openly, until we get the new stand, when the new stand's open, we will address everything. Yeah. But you think, well, there must still be ways around these problems, even in the oldest stadia, surely.
Well, I think there are. I've got to say, I hear it time and time again. When we open our new ground, we'll have the fantastic facilities. When we open the new stand, it's going to be great, and we're going to make it inclusive. But there are things that can be done at the moment. It doesn't always have to be huge expenditure to make an improvement. And as I say, the danger is that we do concentrate purely and simply on wheelchair provision or wheelchair spaces as the primary factor as to whether a club is accessible or not. It's not. There's far more important issues as important issues that surround it. So that we've got provision for neurodiverse supporters by way of sensory rooms and so on, which are fantastic.
Yeah.
Better trained stewards who understand. I mean, I remember going to a football match. Get this, when I have a mobility issue, so I sometimes I'm a wheelchair user, sometimes I use crutches. I went to one football match. I was using my crutches, and a steward tried to take the crutches off me because he said they were a weapon. Now, I'm an ex-army officer, and I wasn't a young 16-year-old hooligan. I didn't really fit the profile of football thug, and yet, he was insistent he was going to take the crutches away from me. So we had a little debate, and then he realised he was talking nonsense. But that happens time and time again, and it still happens from reports I'm getting from people. I had somebody else who went to a ground with an assistance dog, and the steward, who obviously hadn't been trained properly, just refused them entry with the decision saying, "You're not taking that dog. It's not coming in this stadium. Full stop." Well, training can cover an awful lot of issues like that, and solve a lot of problems like that. And just the way that you look after your disabled supporters when they're in the stadium. I go to Middlesbrough from time to time. The provisions at Middlesbrough are great. They come and somebody comes and takes an order, whether you want coffee or tea or whatever at half time, and then half time, here it comes and arrives, and it's great. That's little things like that make such a huge difference. The provision of accessible toilet spaces and changing spaces. I mean, can you imagine if you need a changing room for somebody with a disability and it's not there, and you've just got you make use of an ordinary disabled toilet, which are a lot of them are not big enough. I've been to some grounds where it's supposedly an accessible toilet, and you go in with a wheelchair and you can't close the door. I mean, come on, let's get into the 21st century. That is just not acceptable, and it's not acceptable under any circumstances, whether it's an old building, whether it's a new building. I don't care. It's not acceptable.
Well, it's not acceptable as well, Tony. We were told by many fans that, and I again, it's to my shame and to Kieran's shame as well for assuming that everything was getting better. But so many fans told us that they were put next to the home fans when they travelled to away games, which is like that can't be right. The assistance dog thing is really interesting. When I was doing Match of the Day 2, because we had very good relationships with Arsenal, they asked us to do some films covering the end of Highbury and the building of the new stadium.
Yeah.
And I was really impressed how seriously they took the needs for disabled fans when they're building the new stadium, which is because it was a blank sheet. But in particular, I was actually quite touched by the fact that each blind space, where they've got the commentary thing, which is great, but each one had a little space for the assistance dog and a little bowl of food and bowl of water for the assistance dog, which I actually generally found that quite touching. I do need. You've raised it yourself. The reason we've started talking about disabled issues, Tony, was a few weeks ago, and it was essentially a financial reason, because we are a football finance pod, and it was down to us being asked about this notion of one disabled wheelchair bay takes up 12 to 14 seats.
Yeah,
and we were very politely taken to task by a lot of football fans for only discussing wheelchair-bound fans. We heard all sorts of stories, which I was really disappointed to hear. One fan in particular with cerebral palsy, who, like you, is sometimes wheelchair-bound, sometimes crutches, but was telling us about grounds where the disabled car park was a 15-minute walk away from the actual stadium. We had blind fans getting in touch with parents of autistic fans, all sorts of people, which is a long-winded way of saying something you've hinted at. Is it too easy for non-disabled fans to focus simply on the visible disabilities? And how many people would you say are disabled? I mean, it's brilliant on London Transport at the moment, for example. There's a fantastic campaign which says 1 out of 5 people on this train will have a disability. You just don't know it. So please offer your seat, please. So in a football ground with, say, 20,000 people, we know from Kieran's experience, who's colourblind, that 7 to 8% of those people in the ground will be colourblind. So, how many people of disability would you say are in a football ground?
Do you want to know something? I don't think I could give you a definitive answer to that.
Right,
And
okay.
one of the reasons I can't give you a definitive answer is that a lot of people who have a disability don't like to declare the fact that they have a disability. And
Right.
I'll give you my own personal experience. I had a car. Well, I didn't have a car crash. A truck drove into the back of me, which left me with a problem. And for probably the first 18 months after that, I'd had a broken neck and all sorts. It was not a minor little scrap. For 18 months after that, I didn't tell people I was disabled. It was something I steered clear of because I was worried about the. Yeah.
Was that a pride thing? Was that because you wanted to still work and you didn't want people? Why the reluctance to let people know?
I think it was a function. I mean, it probably was a bit of pride, but I think it was first and foremost. It was the fact that I was. I run my own business. So I was probably in a slightly better position than most people, that I could keep everything ticking over. But it worried me what impression people were going to have of me as a disabled person. I mean, I look back on it now and I think, I'm ashamed of myself. I should,
Right.
I'm not one of these people who goes around saying I carry my disability as a badge of pride. I am what I am. Is my viewpoint now. But I think a lot of people are very, very conscious about the fact that if they declare themselves as disabled, other people are going to think differently about them, which I've got to say, sadly, some people do.
Yeah.
They're worried about the work implications and all sorts of other problems.
I hesitate.
Sad, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. One of the I don't want to use the word ambitions that you talk about in your level playing field website, because it shouldn't be an ambition, it should be a given. But you talk about wanting to ensure that disabled people are seen as customers with the same commercial value as other fans. I found that really interesting, and I spent a lot of time thinking, and I couldn't recall any evidence of seeing that at any ground I've been to recently. Even simple things like a club shop where things are out of reach, things are on higher shelf. It seems to me that football clubs, and it seems to me as well that that's the goal. That's when your job is done. When
Do you know there are? I've got to say there are examples of clubs where they are doing things. There are some club shops that will only open during certain hours, where they have subdued lighting or different lighting to cope with people who've got sensory issues, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Clubs, as you say, the different counters, that's beginning to change. We've see clubs where they've got different systems for food ordering, which are more accessible for people with different disabilities. We see audio commentary at football matches for people. There is a lot happening that we perhaps aren't always aware of, but there is some good news. And I'm going to Cardiff in a few weeks' time, and I know they do an awful lot for their disabled supporters, and they've got a very strong disabled supporters association as well, which is something that we encourage, because one of sometimes I think disabled people are by nature quite passive. They don't want to be pushing, because they're always worried that if I complain too much, the club's just going to take my season ticket away and they're going to give it to somebody else, and there's going to be plenty of people in the queue. So they don't always push as hard as they should, which is one of the reasons why we're around as an organisation, and we can do that on behalf of individuals. But a strong DSA that can speak sensibly and right. I mean, there's a perception, I think, in some people that because you're disabled, you're not capable of doing anything else. You can't contribute sensibly to a discussion. You can't sit in a boardroom and make financial decisions. Of course you can. And I'll tell you what, if there's 1 in 4 people associated with disability, that's 1 in 4 people who can spend money at football clubs. They can spend money on shirts. They can spend money on season tickets and things like that. It's a big economic value to football clubs that they really, really need to push forward with.
Well, I could say that'll almost be the glorious day that your job is over, when clubs start to exploit you commercially in the same way that they exploit me commercially, basically.
Well, I certainly would like to think that one day an organisation like Level Playing Field won't be needed. I suspect that's a very long way away, if at all.
Start your wellness journey at Whole Foods Market, where it's Jumpstart January through the 16th. Stock up on supplements with some of the year's biggest savings. Plus, save on air-chilled organic boneless skinless chicken breasts, organic Honeycrisp apples, organic large Hass avocados, and more. And since Whole Foods Market is the only certified organic national grocer, it's easy to make them your wellness destination. Jumpstart your January now at Whole Foods Market.
The Disabled Supporters Association is an interesting one, Tony. And I feel I might have been a little bit unfair to my club, actually, because there's a very active DSA at Palace, a lot of whom I know, and the club engage with them very well. They and it's not just, they go way above their responsibilities in terms of engaging with them. Unfortunately, a lot of the time it is to explain some of the reasons why the access isn't as good as it could. But the Palace do take it very seriously.
Yeah.
But does every club at every level have a Disabled Supporters Association? I'm slightly distressed to hear you say that there are some disabled fans who feel that if they raise their head above the parapet, they might lose their season ticket. Because
I'll tell you what. I think that's the perception that the disabled fan has, rather than any specific policy from a club. And one of the things we do at Level Playing Field is actively promote the setting up of disabled supporters associations, and we'll work with disabled fans and the clubs to make sure that functions properly, that it's got the right sort of constitution, and that it's got a bit, it needs to have a bit of bite. There's a two-way respect thing, when it's like any form of negotiation. The club has got to respect the Disabled Supporters Association, but in fairness, the Disabled Supporters Association has got to understand some of the problems that clubs are facing, particularly in you mentioned it earlier. We're in a financial crisis, and I don't think football, once you get outside the mega big clubs, football is not immune from that. I know from my own experience of looking at some clubs, it can be a very, very hard time financially, and DSAs have got to be understanding about that and work collaboratively with the club to see what can be done, because things can be done incrementally, and little changes can make a huge difference.
Are there any specific aspects of the disabled fan experience you're currently focusing on?
We did a survey not so very long ago, where we asked, if this is post pandemic, we were asking disabled fans what their biggest concerns were, and one didn't surprise me, and one did. The one that didn't surprise me was that people were people, that their viewpoint was that I can't see when I go to the match. The minute there's anything exciting happens, somebody stands up, and all I can see is somebody's backside in front of me. What's the point of me doing that? So I think the field of vision, if you like, for disabled fans, particularly those who obviously in a wheelchair, but I'm not a wheelchair user most of the time. I struggle when I go to football matches to get a decent view. And some grounds, I've got to say, the view is absolutely appalling. And you can see, 10% of the pitch at some grounds. It's absolutely crazy. The other issue that I found concerning was that people were concerned about other fans' attitude towards disabled supporters, which I think is a big issue that we really need to think about and address. And we have, I think, probably more by accident rather than intent, but we've seen situations where flares have landed in disabled supporters sections. That really does worry me. We saw everything that went on at Old Trafford first, and then at Wembley as disabled entrances were stormed by fans. It does cause a bit of concern among supporters. So, the sort of things that you would normally think are going to be the key issues, like getting hold of a ticket and getting to the stadium and so on, they're not necessarily the major concerns that people have.
I must say, Kieran and I were very disappointed, and producer Guy, not to say distressed, that some of the stories we heard from disabled fans about this issue, especially where a couple of grounds where disabled away fans are situated near to home fans who obviously couldn't stop themselves celebrating a winning goal in the same way that they would, which is not. I mean, it sounded terrifying, and it's not good. It's not right, and I can't understand why anybody's common sense at any ground would situate away fans of any sort next to home fans.
Exactly, and you know as well as I do, when you go to a football match, you want to be with your fellow fans. You want to be there. That's part of the thing about football. The last thing you want to be is sat in with the opposition and feeling really, really uncomfortable, which I guess is the situation you find yourself in when that happens, and it is awful. And I've experienced it. It's not good. It takes away your enjoyment of the game. And to be honest, you spend most of the time worrying about what's going on around you rather than what's happening on the pitch. So it becomes a bit of a pointless exercise.
Well, of course, there isn't a football fan listening to this who won't have had the experience where you go to a game and you find yourself you think, I'm a little bit too close to some of this, but you go to a steward or you go to a policeman, and you say, mate, do you mind if I move a bit further away? And they will say, yeah, of course, there's loads of seats. Whereas many disabled fans simply can't do that.
That's right. And which is why this idea of away fans being mixed in with the home fans with in terms of disability is just not practical, and that's one of the key things that really does need to change, and it needs to change quickly.
It's not only not practical, Tony. It's not acceptable.
No.
I want to end with a double question, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I'd like to ask what's next for you, how far ahead you're planning various campaigns and projects. But secondly, as I say, we have tens of thousands of listeners to this pod every week. What can you suggest to them? What can you say to them about how they can help, either on a practical level by putting pressure on clubs, or just things to look out for if they see a fan who has a disability, or to consider the fact that somebody may have a disability they can't see? What can you say to our lovely listeners?
What I would say to let me answer that second part of the question first. The first thing is just a mere recognition of the fact that when you are looking at somebody who might be swaying in a queue, they might not necessarily be drunk. They may have a disability that causes that. Be aware that it is an issue that just pay a bit of respect to your fellow fans. They're probably supporters of the same club as you. Look, I'm not saying you should go out of your way to physically help, because sometimes that's the last thing you want is somebody grabbing your arm and saying, "Here, mate, I'll help you this way," because I might not want to go that way. Just apply a bit of common sense, but accept that it may be somebody with an invisible disability. So that really is the main thing. Yeah, put pressure on your clubs. I mean, every time I talk to politicians and we get onto the Equality Act, the one thing I always keep pushing to them, and it would be great if other football fans could do the same. We look at the Equality Act and we've got all these protected characteristics, and it's like a league table in effect. So race and homophobia are right at the top, and it's right that they are protected characteristics, absolutely 100%. But disability is right the way down, and it's sort of we'll worry about that later. Disability has the same level of requirement as any of those other protected characteristics. So let's just make sure that we respect that, and that we recognize the number of people who do have disabilities or are connected with people with disabilities, because it is a large number of people. It's the largest minority group, I suspect, when you look at it in that way. And from a club point of view, there's a big revenue source for people out there. From a supporter point of view, there's loads of fans who could you could shout very loud for your team when you support them. So that is something I would certainly encourage. And in terms of level playing field, we're very active in terms of our expanding our work into other sports, because it's important that a rugby fan has the same opportunities as a football fan or a racehorse fan, whatever. So we're moving into other areas, but a key thing that we're working on at the moment is the rewrite of the Accessible Stager Guide, which should be completed by the end of this year. And I think that will make quite a dramatic impact in terms of what is considered a requirement, a basic minimum requirement that clubs should move to. But I'm not satisfied with clubs simply complying with as a minimum. I want clubs to provide the best possible service. So we're looking for clubs to lead the way. And I think it's fair to say that football, in many ways, and you were talking about the theatre a bit earlier, I think it's fair to say that football really has been a bit of a shining beacon in terms of disability. I mean, it's not shied away from the fact that there are problems in the game. It has addressed some of those problems, and it's probably done a lot more than other sectors in industry and commerce have done so far. So I think football shouldn't be too ashamed of the progress that has been made, but there's still a long, long way to go.
Well, that's good to hear, Tony. Just one point, everybody sees everything in terms of league tables these days, in terms of hierarchies. And of course, what that forgets is that some disabled people are gay, some black people are disabled. So that these things are not all mutually exclusive, are they? That's the thing.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Tony, I wish I could say it has been a pleasure talking to you, Tony. It's been really interesting and I've learned a lot. But in the politest possible way, I wish we didn't have to talk to you. It's a shame that even now you have to be there campaigning, but we wish you all the best. And if there's anything we can ever help you with in terms of publicity or profile, then please let us know and come on and talk to us again. And of course, we wish you well in all your endeavours.
That's very kind of you. I've enjoyed our talk.
Kieran, it's like I said earlier, or yesterday's pod rather, we, in the space of the last 3 and 4 weeks, you and I have quadrupled our knowledge of what it's like to be a disabled football fan. And some of the things that hearing from Tony there is incredible to think that we live in the year 2023, even though progress is being made. But I was really interested in what you had to say, that one of their ambitions for disabled fans is that they are seen as commercially important to football clubs. And he spoke there about how some club shops, for example, are making progress, having different height counters, for example. But it strikes me, Kieran, that football clubs are really missing a trick, because there are probably, at a Premier League game, there are probably 1,000 people who have a disability of some sort. And it seems to me that clubs, I don't know whether they assume that disabled people don't have money to spend, but it seems to me they're missing a trick there in not trying to see the commercial value of disabled fans. I mean, like I said, it seems to me that the golden ambition is that when disabled fans are commercially exploited like the rest of us, then you won't need to have level playing field.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, everybody who is a fan, regardless of whether they've got a disability or not, wants to engage with the club on a variety of levels. And to make it more difficult for a section of your fan base to get together with the club in any way, shape, or form is ludicrous, because that fan might be involved in another industry which could help the club in a variety of ways. That fan could potentially know somebody who could become the next club owner, or have other opportunities to bring the club forwards. And again, one of the things which I noted in the interview was I've become more aware of my unconscious bias of things, and we should always admit that we're in a position to learn. And listening to Tony, that's one of the things. Yeah, it's one of the exits, one of the takeaways that I picked up from listening to him talk.
Yeah. Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution as well, then that would be very kind of you. You can do so by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com, and we will be back in just a couple of days' time with our next questions pod. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The Price of Football. The Price of Football.